Hey everybody, welcome to Matt the Lawyer. I am Matt Johnston, Matt the Lawyer, coming to you from Frederick, Maryland. Nice to see everybody out there in the digital virtual world. Just a quick reminder before we go on, everything you're about to hear is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It's not legal advice. It is, if you have specific questions about legal advice, the facts of your situation do matter. So please contact a lawyer. If you want to contact me, even better. Give me a call. You can go to mattthelawyer.com. That's my website, and you can, find out my email address, my phone number, and you can send me any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. Please do go to the website. There's other information there, other content, other things that I've written that hopefully you will find informative as well. In a previous video, I talked about some of the quick and dirty tips that you can use to figure out if you have a quality written contract. I talked about the shall substitution, one of my absolute favorites. I talked about readability. I talked about the efforts test. Well, today I'm going to talk about 4 more quick and dirty tips that you can use to find out if you have a quality written contract. So the first one that I want to talk about is notwithstanding. Notwithstanding, aside from being a kind of an odd word, is actually kind of a remote detonator, if you want to think of it that way. It is a way to blow up language elsewhere in the contract. It basically says, notwithstanding the language in section 2.5, or notwithstanding what you're about to read below, or notwithstanding what you just read, or the granddaddy of them all, notwithstanding anything else in this contract. This piece of language is important. Okay. It may be important, and it's helpful to point out information that's important. But remember when I said it was kind of like a remote detonator? It blows up language. It contradicts language that appears somewhere else in the contract and very rarely on the page that you're on. So you have to flip through and figure out what they're talking about. The problem with notwithstanding is that it's kind of a lazy tool to use. It's indicative of not spending enough time thinking about whether or not the language that you are putting in there contradicts actual language somewhere else. And if you're pointing to some language somewhere else, why don't you address this issue in that language rather than throwing this hand grenade a little bit later on into the contract? The granddaddy of them all is notwithstanding anything else in this contract. I particularly despise that language because basically what you are saying with that language is this language here next to the notwithstanding part, that's the most important thing and everything else doesn't matter. The other problem is what happens if notwithstanding anything else in this contract to the contrary appears more than once? And it has in many of the contracts that I've read. So which one of those is most important? I don't know. And that's a problem. Remember, contracts are about clarity. They're about understanding. Which brings me to my next test, which is what I like to refer to as the rhetorical flourish. In the world of rhetoric and speech writing and poetry or fiction writing, the use of certain words that are kind of the same, or the use of poetic turns of phrases, things like that, they really do add to understanding. The problem with having rhetorical flourishes in a contract is that they may actually detract from understanding. They may add to confusion. They also are, quite frankly, unnecessary. A contract, again, it's about understanding and it's about clarity. One of my favorite rhetorical flourishes is the phrase, in the event of. That doesn't sound like much, right? It's 4 little itty bitty words. It's only 5 syllables. Hey, it's only 11 letters. Doesn't sound that bad, right? But what it means is if. In the event of means if. Why not just use if? 2 letters, 1 word. Takes up less space, operates better. Plus, because it's usually as part of a conditional, and what I call an if-then statement, if party X doesn't do task A, then party Y gets to do something else. If-then. In the event of equals if. Let's be concise. Another rhetorical flourish is what I often refer to as seeing double or seeing triple. These are couplets or triplets as they're technically called in language school, I guess. But often what you are seeing is two verbs that are kind of the same, or three verbs that are kind of the same, but don't really mean the same thing. These are often done to sort of CYA, for a lawyer to sort of cover their butts a little bit and try and figure out a way to cover as much information as possible, or as many eventualities as possible. The problem with it is those words often have very specific meanings in and of themselves, or are so vague that they don't actually add to the clarity and understanding of the contract. One of the most common ones that you'll see in indemnification provisions is indemnify, defend, and hold harmless. Indemnify has a very specific meaning. Defend has a very specific meaning that's not really the same thing as indemnify. And hold harmless, well, that's just plain vague. What does that mean? It is an attempt to be broad when breadth is not necessary, and usually is counterproductive. So when you see that kind of language, you need to start asking yourself, what do these words really mean, and how do I express them better? How do I understand what the contract drafter is trying to say? Finally, there's my favorite. Well, it's not really my favorite. One of my favorite quick and dirty tests, and that's the anachronism test. Contracts have been around for a long time, and contract language does evolve over time. The words that we use evolve over time. There is some changes in meaning, and that's just the natural part of flow of language. It's not a fixed thing. But anachronisms are kind of an odd sort of thing. Now, for those of you who don't really quite get what I mean by an anachronism, think of it this way. You go to a Renaissance festival. You see people all dressed up in the knights' regalia and monks and all this other stuff, and it's really cool. But then you see a knight with all of his chainmail and his sword and stuff like that. He's walking around, he's talking on his iPhone. That's an anachronism. You have something in the past and something in the future. The problem is that anachronisms in contract are words and phrases that just don't mean anything today, or still mean something but have no real place in a contract. And my favorite one is witnesseth. Okay? The word witness with ETH at the end. I don't know where this began, but it wouldn't surprise me if Abraham Lincoln was using it in his contracts, or if Thomas Jefferson was using it in his contracts. It's an old word, and usually it's spelled with little spaces between each letter. So if you ever see that in a contract, do two things for me. Number one, check to make sure your lawyer still has a pulse, because that dude is old. And number two, run the other way. Anachronisms do not add to clarity. They don't add to understanding. And so you want to make sure that you can understand the contract. And what does witnesseth mean anyway? Well, basically it means, hey, pay attention to this document. Well, you're doing so already. It's a contract. All right, so enough of that little rant. So once again, check for your contract if you have anachronisms like witnesseth or whereas. I don't like whereas either. Also look to see if you've got these seeing double, seeing triple, these couplets or triplets of verb phrases usually. Look for rhetorical flourishes, things that don't mean anything, or things that mean something that can be expressed a lot shorter. And finally, look out for that remote control detonator of notwithstanding, because it's going to blow up some language somewhere. In the meantime, I hope everybody enjoys these videos. If you want to leave a comment, please do so. I do check the comments. I would like to hear what everybody has to say. In the meantime, go outside and watch some live soccer. I'll speak to everybody later. Bye-bye.